Have you ever heard of an empire that lasted for over 1,000 years? No, I'm not talking about Rome. I'm talking about an African powerhouse, an empire whose story has been overshadowed for far too long. Today, we're journeying back in time to the heart of Africa, to the shores of Lake Chad, to uncover the secrets of the Kanem Bornu Empire. This isn't just a story of kings and conquests. It's a story of resilience, adaptation, and a legacy that stretched across a millennium, proving that longevity, not just collapse, is a crucial part of African history. So, how did they do it? How did this empire outlast so many others? Let's find out. Our story begins around the year 700 AD, not with a grand unified kingdom, but with a collection of nomadic groups known as the Kanem, living east of the massive Lake Chad. These groups were skilled pastoralists, moving with their herds. But among them, one clan, the Magami, began to rise. Led by the Dugawa dynasty, they started consolidating power, uniting the different clans under a single banner. This wasn't an overnight process. It was a slow, deliberate series of alliances, conquests, and political maneuvering. The key to their success was control. Control over the fertile lands around the lake, and more importantly, control over the burgeoning trade routes that crisscrossed the Sahara. Think of Lake Chad as a giant oasis in the middle of a vast desert. It was a vital source of water and life, attracting people, animals, and trade. The early Kanem rulers recognized this. By establishing their authority here, they placed themselves at the hub of a massive network. Caravans carrying salt, a commodity as valuable as gold, traveled south from the desert mines. From the south came gold, ivory, and enslaved people. These goods all passed through Kanem's territory, and the rulers were smart enough to tax this trade, building a powerful treasury. This wealth funded their growing army and state apparatus. Around the 11th century, a major shift occurred. A new dynasty, the Saifowa, took control. They claimed descent from a legendary Yemeni hero, Saifi bin Yazan, a story that linked their lineage directly to the heartland of the Islamic world. This wasn't just a convenient myth. It signaled a profound change. The most famous of these early Saifowa rulers, Maihame, converted to Islam. This was a game changer. Adopting Islam didn't just change their personal faith, it plugged Kanem into a vast, international community. It gave them access to a shared language of diplomacy or bekand, a legal framework, share a law that helped to formalize their government. Suddenly, the rulers of this Central African kingdom were corresponding with sultans in North Africa and the Middle East. They were no longer just a regional power. They were players on the world stage. With this new Islamic identity came a focus on learning. Mosques and schools were built, and scholars were welcomed. Timbuktu often gets the credit, but Kanem was also a center of Islamic scholarship. This investment in education created a class of literate administrators who could run the empire's increasingly complex bureaucracy. They managed finances, recorded laws, and handled diplomatic correspondence, making the state more efficient and stable. The Saifowa rulers weren't just warriors. They were sophisticated state builders. The empire's military was the engine of its expansion. At its core was a formidable force of armored cavalry. Imagine knights, not in medieval Europe, but thundering across the Sahelian plains of Africa. These warriors, clad in quilted armor and iron helmets, mounted on imported war horses, were the elite shock troops of the Kanem army. They allowed the Mayor king to project power over vast distances, compelling tribute from vassal states and protecting the crucial trade routes from raiders. The army wasn't just for conquest. It was the ultimate guarantor of the economic stability that the empire was built on. By the 13th century, under the rule of Maidunama Dablami, the Kanem Empire reached its zenith. Its influence stretched north into the Fezzan region of modern-day Libya, south into the lands of the Hausa, and east and west across the Sahel. Maidunama was said to command an army of over 30,000 horsemen. He established diplomatic relations with sultans in Tunisia and Egypt, and even set up a special hostel in Cairo for students and pilgrims from his empire. Kanem was a recognized superpower. But as with all great empires, this golden age couldn't last forever. A period of internal strife and external pressure began in the late 14th century. A rival group, the Balala, rose to the east and began challenging the Saifowa's authority. Decades of brutal warfare followed. This conflict was so devastating that it forced the Saifowa dynasty to do the unthinkable, abandon their ancestral capital, Njimi, the heart of the Kanem kingdom for centuries. They migrated west, across Lake Chad, to a region called Bornu. This could have been the end of the story. A dynasty exiled, a capital lost. But this is where the genius and resilience of the Saifowa truly shine. This wasn't a collapse, it was a strategic relocation. In Bornu they found new, fertile lands and a new population to rule over, the Kanuri people. They spent nearly a century consolidating their new base, regrouping, and rebuilding their strength. This move from Kanem to Bornu is why we call the empire Kanem Bornu. It's two chapters of the same epic story. The Great Revival came in the late 15th century under one of the empire's most legendary rulers, Mai Ali Gaji. He was a brilliant military strategist and a savvy politician. He established a new, fortified capital at Zargamu. This wasn't just a collection of huts. It was a massive, walled city, a symbol of renewed power and permanence. From this secure base, my Ali Gaji launched a series of campaigns, not just reconquering the lost lands of Kanem from the Balala, but also expanding the empire's influence further than ever before. The 16th century saw the arrival of another iconic leader, my Idris Aluma. If you remember one name from this story, it should be his. Idris Aluma was a modernizer, a reformer, and a military genius. He chronicled his reign in detail, giving us an incredible window into his world. He recognized that the old ways of warfare were not enough. So, he looked to the Ottoman Empire, the global superpower of the day. He imported Turkish firearms and military advisors to train his troops in the use of muskets. Kanem Bornu became one of the first sub-Saharan African states to adopt gunpowder technology on a large scale. His army was now a hybrid force, combining the devastating charge of the traditional armored cavalry with the firepower of musketmen. He also built a navy of large boats to control Lake Chad, giving him unmatched mobility. With this reformed military, he solidified his control over the empire, pacified rebellious vassals, and secured the trade routes once and for all. But he was more than just a warrior. He was a devout Muslim who replaced traditional courts with Islamic ones, built brick mosques instead of wood ones, and encouraged pilgrimages to Mecca. He was the complete package, a military innovator, a pious ruler, and a master administrator who cemented the foundations of the Bornu state for the next 250 years. For centuries after Idris Aluma, the Kanem Bornu Empire enjoyed a long period of relative stability and prosperity. It continued to be a major commercial and cultural hub. The capital, Ngazargamu, was a bustling metropolis, and the Mai ruled with absolute authority from his palace. The empire's long survival is a testament to its incredible ability to adapt, moving its capital, reforming its military, and integrating new peoples and ideas. But by the early 19th century, the world was changing again. A new powerful force was rising to the west, the Sokoto Caliphate, born out of a jihad led by Usman Danfodio. The Fulani warriors of Sokoto launched attacks on Bornu's western territories, even managing to sack the capital, Ngazargamu. In 1808, the centuries-old Safwa dynasty, which had survived exile and countless wars, was now on the brink of collapse. Salvation came from an unlikely source. A scholar and statesman named Muhammad Alamin al-Kanami rose to lead the resistance. He wasn't from the royal Saifawa line, but his charisma, military skill, and intellectual prowess rallied the Bornu people. He successfully drove back the Sokoto forces and saved the state from destruction. However, the old dynasty was fatally weakened. Al-Kanemi became the real power behind the throne, and his descendants, who took the title of Shehu, would eventually displace the Saifawa dynasty completely, ending a line of rulers that had lasted for 1,000 years. The Al-Kanemi dynasty ruled for the rest of the 19th century, but the final blow came not from a neighboring African power, but from a Sudanese warlord named Rabi az-Zubair. In the 1890s, armed with modern European weapons, Rabi conquered Bornu, ending its existence as an independent state. Shortly after, the scramble for Africa brought European colonial powers, the French, British, and Germans, who defeated Rabi and carved up the ancient empire's territory, drawing lines on a map that still define the borders of Nigeria, Niger, Chad, and Cameroon today. So why is this thousand-year story so important? The Kanem Bornu Empire challenges the simplistic narratives we're often told about African history. It shows a story of incredible endurance, sophisticated statecraft, and constant adaptation. This was a state that engaged in international diplomacy, adopted new technologies, and fostered centers of learning. It survived not for a few generations, but for a millennium. It reminds us that African history is not a footnote. It's filled with epics of its own, stories of empires that rose, ruled, and shaped the world for centuries. The legacy of Kanem Bornu lives on in the culture, language, and people of the Lake Chad region, a quiet testament to one of the longest-lasting empires in human history. Thanks for watching. If you found this journey into the past fascinating, be sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next historical deep dive.